A little over 2 years ago, Honda unveiled the 10th generation Accord, and it was one of those cars that really divided opinions for better or worse. Well, mostly for worse because, nobody has seen an Accord looking like this. But if you really cut through the noise and start dissecting the car like we're about to, you learn that the Accord is no longer the car its predecessors were. Got that?
Got it.
Now, the reason why it took the Accord this long to get into Malaysia is largely because of local assembly. I say largely because there are also other issues like price, but let's not get into the details. For now, just know that the car is built in Pergoh, Melaka, which is one of only 4 plants in the entire world to build Honda's flagship D-segment sedan. But the D-segment sedan market is a fast shrinking one, with pricing being the core reason behind its diminishing market share. If you're considering the Accord, Toyota Camry, Volkswagen Passat or Mazda 6, chances are you're also considering an SUV that's around the same price, or cough up a little more dough to get your foot into the compact premium offerings from BMW and Mercedes-Benz. Now, the Accord next to me is the range-topping premium model, which currently retails at 188,000 ringgit thanks to an 8.5 thousand ringgit discount with the SST exemption. But if you're looking to get the Accord, also keep in mind that there is a cheaper variant, one that's cheaper by 9,000 ringgit, but we recommend getting this guy because of all the safety feature it comes with. But having said that, let us now address the elephant in the room, the design. Now, I gotta be honest, it took me a while to get used to the Accord looking like this. First of all, it's 4.9 meters long, which is extraordinarily lengthy for a car if you haven't driven a long car. It's only 5 millimeters shorter than the Camry. The reason why it looks so long is also because it's 15 millimeters lower than the older car, and that it has a fastback profile, much like the Civic. This is something the Accord never ever had. So this is an interesting addition. Another reason why the car looks so long in the metal is because the wheelbase has been extended by 55 millimeters. Now that is an insane amount of stretch for a car like this, and most of the space goes into the rear passenger space, which is, I gotta say, one of the best, if not the best, in the D-segment sedan market. Up front, it gets a nice slim pair of LED headlights with the typical multi-reflector design, L-shaped LED DRLs and LED turn signals, as well as a huge center intake and LED fog lights. It also gets 18-inch wheels shod with Michelin Primacy 3ST tires, C-shaped LED taillights, an integrated spoiler here on the rear deck, which looks nice, as well as twin exhaust exits. Unlike the Passat though, these ones have actual holes, but the rail pipes are hidden behind them. Now, before we step inside, check this out. The Accord now gets laser welded rain channels, which means it doesn't need that ugly rubber strip to cover the overlapping sheet metals. So this gives it a more premium and a cleaner look. I kind of like this. It's very premium. The one thing I noticed upon getting into this car is how low you're seated. It's almost like getting into a Civic, which I gotta say, for a D-segment car is rather strange. Anyway, there's a lot of pros and cons in this cabin, and let us just start with the good stuff, starting with the steering wheel. I kind of like the diameter, the material quality, and the leather feels smooth. Nothing here feels cheap, and the buttons definitely don't feel cheap because look at that. Feels really high in quality, and this is one of the better Honda steering wheels, I gotta say. Speaking of stuff I like, there is also a 7-inch instrument panel, a digital display on the left side of the instrument panel. On one hand, I'm pretty glad that Honda caught up with the times by offering, a somewhat digital screen for the instrumentation. But on the other hand, it kind of seems a little low res. I mean, the animation and the amount of information you get is really good here, but then at night there's a little bit of light bleed on all sections of the black panel, so it kind of looks a bit cheap. And Again, it's not very high res, so make of that what you will. The dashboard, on the other hand, features this very nice two-tiered cowl design, which reminds me of older Audis and some other premium cars. So to have that in an Accord plus a shorter dashboard gives you a very good sense of space, and it's actually pretty spacious for both the driver and the front passenger. Material selection feels really good here. You've got soft touch materials on the dashboard, and it goes all the way around the top section of the door cards as well as the rear doors. The lower section here, the center console sides, are also leather padded. It gets, you know, nice contrast stitching, but I digress. It's pretty comfortable here, and when you bump your knee into the center tunnel, it doesn't really hurt, so that's really good. But having said that, there are hard plastics here, as well as here, as well as on the lower sides of the door, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad quality, it's just there. This wood trim is actually fake plastic. It's got that open pore-esque matte finish design, and it's brown. I do not know what to think of it after driving it over a weekend. I think it's okay, it's just kind of there, but it doesn't really stick out, so I guess that's that. Another thing Honda has decided to do is upgrade the seats to more comfortable units. They don't just look good, by the way, they are actually quite supportive and functionally so. Notice this portion of the seats, well, they raise the shoulder bolsters, so taller individuals like, I don't know, Europeans or Americans are gonna find these seats pretty comfortable. In terms of padding, I think it's right up there with the Camry. It's plusher than the seats that you get in the Passat, and it's perforated, but no ventilation. So there you go. For the infotainment, you get a standard 8-inch display here in the middle. It's a combination of touch and physical hard buttons, and the tiles you see here, well, they are adjustable. You just gotta press, long press, and then you drag and drop. It's a bit clunky, but it gets the job done. Animations are pretty smooth and fluid too, but again, like this guy, it's a little bit on the lower res. The good thing is, it at least comes with a matte surface, so it doesn't attract fingerprints as much. These buttons make it far more convenient to use than the full touch-based system in the older car. Apple CarPlay and Android Auto are standard, and there's also a wireless smartphone charging tray. Speaking of Apple CarPlay, this car uses a physical cable connection and not a wireless display, so it looks clunky. The smartphone charging tray is right there, right beneath where you plug your phone to charge and connect to the head unit. So I don't get what's happening here, but at least you have both. So there you go, Apple CarPlay is here as shown. I think overall the Discover Pro head unit in the Passat is miles better than this. It's better display quality, it's more responsive, and it's better integrated. For me, this head unit faces dead straight to the back instead of being angled slightly towards the driver, but at least it's right here. It's kind of low profile and doesn't intrude into your vision outwards. And it's compared to the Camry, which has the screen here and tilted towards you. I think this is a little bit, well, how should I put it? Not ideal. At least not for the driver, but you know, your passengers can enjoy the screen. Okay, let's start with the nitpicking, as if we need more bad news for 2020. Let's start with this, the digital display for the aircon. Well, it's got a dual zone climate control system as standard, but this display it gets the same matte surface finish as this guy, but the way it lets light bleed is just really terrible looking in this car and in this segment. And then you also have the sound system, which I think is one of the biggest, if not the biggest letdown that I've experienced so far while driving the Accord. It's got a very weird sound signature, you know, the vocals for some reason just seems to come off the middle section here of this speaker. It's got a 10-speaker sound system and a subwoofer built into the back, but for some reason it just doesn't deliver the kind of auditory fidelity that you expect from a 10-speaker system. There's a weird emphasis on vocals, and it comes off the center. The depth in terms of trebles, the mid-range and the bass, they're not quite there. It doesn't pack a punch, and it's almost as though you're sitting in a concert hall with the sound coming off the center stage. Some people, I think, will appreciate that, and I appreciate the fact that Honda tried something different here, but it's not for me. I just wish there's more solid sound to how everything else sounds. I've tried with all sorts of music. I've tried plugging in my phone, stream high quality on Spotify. I still get the same underwhelming experience. That was a rant.
Kind of a
For back seats, as you can see, this is tremendously spacious for a D-segment car. This is like almost S-Class levels of space here, if not almost equal. And as you can see, there's also controls for the four-way adjuster for the front passenger seat. This is right off the Camry's playbook, and it's good to see that the Accord have it for this time around. And I like the fact that they use cushion padding that goes all the way here, so all the way to the C-pillars, and it's like you can slouch and still be comfortable and maybe fall asleep if you'd like to. It's just nice to have it here. So kudos to Honda for that. Other stuff include this manual sunshade on both sides of the door, but unfortunately you don't get a powered sun blind for the rear. That is quite a bit of a shame, but I think it's also because, see, it's almost noon now and sun is right behind me. But when you're seated at the back, you don't get sunlight directly on your head. So maybe that's why they didn't see a need to include powered sun blinds. So I think all things considered, the fastback profile sort of works, I guess, in this configuration. But what I don't like is the fact that they did not use LED lights for the cabin at all. There's no ambient lighting. I mean, it just looks drab. And I mean, come on, this bulb thing is very 2000. And this light in the middle, I mean, it's so far out. The map lights should be here, like most sensible cars nowadays, right? Well, at least you've got twin air vents here that doesn't look as bad as the Toyota Camrys, and you've got two humongous port covers here for your USB chargers. Last but not least, you've got this center armrest with two cubbies in it, but check this out. You hear that? That's the sound of money going to waste. What la day? Finally, boot space. Now, as you can see, there is no powered boot, which is one downfall, I guess, but small matter. The redeeming factor, however, is the actual space you get, which is 570 liters of space. Now, this is only 10 liters smaller than the Passat B8.5, but what is 10 liters anyway? You can fit an entire fridge in here, and if you want to fit longer items, there's a little bit of a caveat. You can fold the rear bench down. There is no split folding or anything like that. The Camry doesn't have split folding or folding bench whatsoever, but this guy at the seat back folds in one complete fold, if that makes sense. But, you know, if you want fastback, there you go lah. If you fold the seat bench, this car becomes a two-seater coupe, man. You want fastback? Take lah your style. Take it and go. For the first time in Malaysia, the Accord comes with a 1.5-litre turbocharged engine, and unlike some other car brand, we actually get the top-of-the-line output and engine here, which is 201 PS and 260 Nm of torque. That is quite a bit more power than what our neighbours in Thailand and Indonesia get, which is about 190 PS and 243 Nm of torque. So perhaps it was worth the wait after all. So how does it perform? Pretty well, I've got to say. The mid-range torque is the sweet spot here, so anyway between 3.5 to 4,500 RPM is where the car will really pull, and it will continue pulling until it runs out of breath, and by the time you realize that, it's already way past the speed limit. And you've got to be doing really fast to realize that it's running short on breath. As a car to drive in the city, this 1.5-litre engine is pretty fuel efficient, but it can get quite thirsty if you call on the turbo for more spirited drives, for example. I managed to get about slightly over 10 litres per 100 km over the weekend of mixed driving condition and a bit of idle time, which is about the same as Hafriz managed to get with his Camry, which runs on the older 2.5-litre naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine. So it's interesting to see that they are quite on par despite being a full litre in terms of displacement, different, this one being smaller. But I bet Hafriz didn't have quite as much fun as I had. If you're worried about this car being underpowered, then you're worried about the wrong thing. You're actually getting a lot of performance by paying that 90 ringgit road tax. A CVT is the only transmission that's offered here, and whenever the car feels slow or sluggish to respond, well, it's largely because of the gearbox. I mean, if your engine makes that much power but still takes 9.1 seconds to the 0 to 100, then it's definitely the gearbox that is holding it back. Throttle response is a little slow for my liking, especially in Econ and normal mode, but if you switch it into sport mode via one of the two buttons here, then it becomes a lot more responsive because the RPM will just hover a little over 2000 RPM. So that's going to give you quicker bursts of acceleration. I'm not a big fan of CVT, so to speak, because it's not a very engaging gearbox from a driver's point of view. So technically speaking, it's quite a weak point for the Accord, because otherwise the Accord is a pretty enjoyable car to drive. The steering wheel is light and direct, so it's very easy to just point and shoot. But I noticed that feedback is a little muted, but that's okay, you're driving a D-segment car, right? Honda also managed to reduce weight by up to 80 kilograms, so the combination of that weight loss and the fact that it's using a smaller 1.5 litre engine makes the front end lighter. And what that means is that this Accord is practically the most dynamic and sportiest version of the D-segment sedan that I have driven to date, and it drives nothing like its predecessors. The chassis is stiffer this time around, making the car feel adequately tight in most driving situations. And the damping, I gotta say, is very well tuned. It still feels characteristically Japanese in all intents and purposes, but the way it manages to soak up the bumps and undulating surfaces is actually quite impressive. In uncle speak, very solid. Damping is a little bit on the firm side, so if I were to rate it, this guy would sit right in the middle between the Camry and the Passat. Obviously, the Camry being the most comfortable and the Passat being the firmest but not the worst. It's just more fun to drive, I would say. Despite decades of rivalry with the Toyota Camry, the Accord doesn't pretend to be anything like the Camry, because while Toyota continues to serve that pool of customers, it's almost like driving this Accord makes me feel like Honda engineers deliberately want maybe existing Civic owners to upgrade to something more familiar, because who knows, maybe they've got a bigger family now. But that's the vibe that I'm getting with this Accord, because it feels familiar, it feels sporty, almost too sporty for the Accord's own good. But it's really not a bad thing. One last thing I want to address before we move over to our conclusion is NVH levels. Now, traditionally, Honda cars have always been pretty bad in terms of isolating tire raw and just generally having a noisier cabin. But with this 10th generation Accord, I'm very happy to report that the NVH levels are pretty acceptable. I mean, it's pretty obvious that it's quieter in this car because the tires, well, they are Michelin premises, so that's off to a good start. But Honda engineers also said that they have included, or they have used more insulating materials for several key components of the car, like the front engine bay, and then the wheel wells get carpeted lining, and there's also a full underbody tray, so the car is more aerodynamic. It cuts through wind better, and generally noise levels never went beyond 85 decibels. I mean, based on rudimentary iPhone testing. So overall, what would I rate it? Again, right in the middle between the Camry and the Passat. Well, obviously the Camry being the quietest, and maybe the Passat could use a better set of tires, but as it stands right now on factory tires, I think the Accord is quieter than the Passat, and that is saying a lot. Now, remember what I said earlier about choosing the premium variant over the regular version? Well, that's because this car is the only variant to come with Honda Sensing, which includes a few active safety features such as adaptive cruise control, lane keep assist, lane departure warning, 360-degree camera, Honda lane watch, so you've got two cameras here on the side mirrors, and then there's smart assist parking, there's also forward collision warning. So a lot of the safety features you get as standard, which are not available in the cheaper variant. This is why you should get this one. To summarize, the Honda Accord is very much less of an uncle's car now. Not only does it look sportier, it also drives sportier, but it still comes with many of the creature comforts that you expect a D-segment car to have. So I'll leave you with this. If you prefer to be chauffeured 80% of the time to meetings and whatnot, the Camry is definitely the kind of car that you should spring for. But if you want to enjoy yourself every now and then with a bit of fun behind the wheel, the Honda Accord strikes a perfectly fine balance between being fun to drive and being able to sit behind and relax, you know, and be chauffeured into your meetings and whatever. I think if you want the absolute fun, there's also options like the Mazda 6 and the Volkswagen Passat. So the choice is yours, but just note that, you know, you also have the choice of going for an SUV or a more premium car. It's a tough situation for D-segment cars to be in, but at least you know these are your options. I think that's pretty much it for my review of the Accord. Let us know what you think of the car and which D-segment sedan would you rather choose or not choose, and let us know everything in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe so you get more videos like this in the future. And until next time, I will see you in the next video. And please take care of yourself, guys. Bye-bye.